Actually, talking about the transgender boy that was kicked out of the Cub Scouts. We were just talking. We were actually just trying to generate some discussion on the subject. What I've seen happen over the last couple of years, like while I was in the military, of course, I did watch how in boot camp how some of the LGBT were mocked and treated. So and this was before the Supreme Court, a year ago, gave all the treated LGBT as like everybody else. They finally made that law. We knew that this was going on, and we knew that there were struggles within that community that are probably still going on. Not just shout out also to our DFW and Texas fans, but again, this isn't a Texas issue. This is a world issue. I mean, even I was reading articles about how the LGBT in Africa are subjugated, how the LGBT in Europe struggle, and I don't know if y'all know about the no hate campaign. What are we really doing to combat the anti-LGBT culture that is being produced when we have situations like this, where a transgender is being discriminated upon?
I have a few things to add. So I know the Human Rights Campaign has done a lot of work in this area, and they have a very strong chapter in the DFW area. I think there's actually two, one in Dallas and one in Fort Worth, if I'm not mistaken. And they're a great resource for anyone in that community that has these sorts of issues. But really, for the Boy Scout thing, I think that the Libertarians have been one of the first. They were the first political party to have LGBT rights as part of our platform, and we're very strong historically in supporting that. But we also believe in the free market, and issues like this get really tricky for libertarians, because by no means do I think that transgendered people or anyone like that, I don't want them to experience discrimination. But at the same time, the Boy Scouts as a private organization, they're allowed to dictate who their members are. And I think it's very important that private organizations retain that to be able to say who their members are and members are not.
I also want to point out that whenever you have a company that decides to decline, let's say, a certain class of people, let's say you have a company that doesn't want to offer their services to redheads, and redheads all band together and they're all pissed off, and people like myself who are friends with redheads will also join with them, and I'll say I don't want to shop there anymore, and there will be more competition for a company to open up that does support redheads and everyone else, and that's where I'm going to shop. So whenever you have the government forcing a business to do this or that, what is actually happening is you're forcing the people to buy from these bigots, like these people who want to discriminate a whole lot against all sorts of people for all sorts of different views of theirs. You're actually buying their product because they have no choice but to sell to you.
A private organization their property rights need to be protected. I get that. But again, and this is a question for our roundtable audience, what are we teaching, the millennials, the current generation, the children? What are we teaching them when we say, because this person is transgender, they're not welcome into this group?
I'm from a really small town in North Carolina, and it's still a problem. It is a huge problem. They have a very brave group of activists in that town that run an LGBT organization. And for example, at the last trunk or treat, everybody comes out in the town, all the different organizations. You've got your candy, and there were people having their children cross the street and say, you don't want to be over there with those people. Don't take their candy. Don't eat their candy. And that was like 3 months ago that happened in America. So I think it's still the discrimination is still a huge issue. And it's really up to individual people to begin teaching their children differently, because that sort of it's ingrained, I think, in a lot of the culture. But I think you're starting to see that change, and I think organizations like the Boy Scouts will increasingly become under pressure from the public to change some of their policies to be more inclusive.
Absolutely. And another thing that you mentioned earlier is that you mentioned in the military they were mistreating gays. As libertarians, we do not believe that the government has the right to discriminate. We believe that the government has to be fair, and that's why the more you limit the government, the more it works, and the more expansive your government is, the more it gets tricky and the more discrimination is involved, and that's why you have the corporate welfare, and that's why you have government deciding on which businesses should survive.
Such and such corporation is against the LGBT. It's that they support the property rights or the religious rights. Like, I'm sure there's always an angle you can swing it to say that, well, religion has rights too. Yes, we know it's the First Amendment, but what about the rights of the LGBT? This transgender person has to go back to their family, look, their mom and dad in the eye, like, I'm not accepted. That's a culture. This isn't just one person. That's a culture. We're teaching that. In my opinion, it's not discrediting the libertarian perspective. I think it's more accenting it, saying that, look, if we practice capitalism a little bit differently, where instead of blocking these kind of businesses from being able to be created, let them exist so we can see who they are, and the target can be put on their head. That's a radical perspective.
It's definitely radical, but freedom and freedom of choice is radical. The more you limit someone, the less radical they can be, the less free they can be. So the more radical something is, the more transparent it is. The more transparent the marketplace is, the better you will spend your money. So, like, for example, I saw this going around Facebook. The owner of Jimmy John's, the sandwich place, right? He apparently goes and hunts like giraffes and elephants and stuff like that. And I'm personally a vegetarian, and whenever I hear that, I also kind of jump on the bandwagon of I'm not going to shop there anymore. It kind of gave me a bad, just sort of gave me a bad.
It gives you a sense of purpose when you say, look, I have the power to not shop at Walmart, so I'm not going to go.
Exactly. If the most powerful thing that can help a company is the free market, is the people, because after all, the government is taking money from the people anyway.
I want to before we close out, just to shout out to our fans again. The cannabis activism. I know that the Libertarian Party, it has really been a green light for this department for a while. Hey, take it how you want to. 20-year mandatory jail sentences for less than an ounce of weed is not acceptable. There are private prison systems that are profiting off of the current drug laws. Now, this is capitalism here. It's hurting the two can work together is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this, and I read an article to circle back around to what we were talking about earlier with the homelessness being illegal. I read an article, though, that was basically like in some states, the prison population is going down because of the change in some of the drug reform laws, and but they need to continue making money off the prisons. So they need people to fill the prisons. So now being poor is illegal because they can get you to work cheap. Yeah.
After the Emancipation Proclamation, the ongoing culture of colored people that were unemployed was ridiculous. That they didn't have a way to make money, and where that ties in is they became criminals. They became wards of the state. Anything is a crime at this point. Just being out after dark, or just, like people used to talk about how, DWB, driving while black. Like, I mean, the joke came from the history of how, freed slaves were treated after the Emancipation Proclamation. We're not talking about the big picture and how an economy is developed here. We're leaving out the fact that people who didn't have an education were treated as criminals and weren't treated as people who need to be reprogrammed to come back into society, to become working class individuals. They were just treated as if they were a problem, and thus began the prison industrial complex.